secret did you find out about someone that permanently changed the way you looked at them? Story 1. I just found out yesterday that my wife, 29, a teacher, started an affair with a student, 18, of hers about 2 months ago. We have been together for 10 years and married for 4. We have a 4-month-old daughter and she threw it all away. Career, marriage, and family. I had no idea anything was wrong until 6 days ago when I found her crying in bed and she told me she was depressed, no longer in love with me, and suicidal mostly because of my drinking habits. I took sole responsibility, swore off drinking, and had us signed up for marriage counseling the same day, plus got her in contact with a postpartum depression group. 6 days later, she is sent to a crisis center by her school, and I find out everything after the psychiatrist there makes her tell me the truth when I show up to bring her home. My life is so fucked right now that I can't even sleep and I'm holding a 4-month-old baby trying not to cry, while her cheating mother is 5 miles away in a hospital room. Safe to say I will never see my wife the same way again. Story 2. My wife's bestie confided in us that, while short of money, was moonlighting as a professional dominatrix. Until then, we had thought that she was super vanilla. Story 3. Had a work friend back in the day. His wife was really mean to him. She always would tell me his kids hate him, even though they would run to the door excited when their daddy was home. And when she was really mad at him, she would flip out and say that he fucked his sister and fucked a pig. He would just ignore her and not say anything back. Now I just ignored it because she would always try and make him look bad when she was mad at him. Well, one night we were drinking and he was pretty drunk. His wife got mad and did it again, but this time the heated exchange went like this. "You fucked your sister and you fucked a pig once." Long pause. "You know what? Fuck you. That happened like 3 years ago. You need to just drop it and move on. I don't deserve to have it rubbed in my face all the time." Then I realized why she held such resentment towards him, and I noped the out of there and never talked to them again. I feel so bad for their kids. It was a really dysfunctional situation for them. Luckily, I heard they aren't together anymore. Story 4. There is an engineering professional at my workplace that likes to wear pricey articles of clothing. He even sports a Breitling wristwatch, priced from $3,000 to over $17,000, as his work timepiece. Turns out that he and his wife are buried beneath a mountain of credit card debt. And while I do not look down my nose at him, I definitely view his attire and accessories differently knowing that fact. Story 5. I had a seemingly innocent friend who normally kept to herself about her issues. Then one day she told us that she couldn't tell if she had a sore throat because she was sick or because she swallowed too much the other night. That was the only thing I associated her name with afterwards. Story 6. In my early days as a lawyer, I represented a sweet old widower with Parkinson's disease who was being sued by a local store for groceries his late wife had purchased on credit without ever paying for. I felt awful for him. And then, shortly before trial, I found out he'd done jail time for molesting children. Story 7. A family member's ex-wife of several years, whom I was still close with, asked me never to leave my daughter alone with my relative. She said that the reason they never had kids was that he confided when incredibly drunk that he had uncontrollable desires towards young, really young girls. He was upset and told her he felt he was evil and deserved to die. She asked him if he ever did anything and he said no, and asked her to forgive him and asked God to make him better. Again, he was like blackout intoxicated. This was surprising information. She didn't tell me in spite and actually still loves him very much. I haven't heard or seen evidence of grooming or any extra attention paid to any of the female children in my family. He could have just been really drunk and out of his mind, but there is zero way I'm going to leave my daughter alone with him or let her out of my sight at family functions. I don't have evidence that what she said was true, so I can't really do anything with the information other than be diligent. Story 8. Here's a positive one. My wife, a defense attorney, has a work colleague who is the biggest you will ever meet. A blowhard who revels in winning at any cost and brags about the snarky things he does to really twist the knife. He's known as a sharp legal mind, but I get the sense that he likes to try to screw weaker ADAs or other counselors and loves it when he catches them in some technicality. He makes all those stereotypes about lawyers seem valid. My church had a sort of Habitat for Humanity-esque service weekend where we were rehabbing an old warehouse into a new space as a temporary women's shelter for battered women. The offices were already up, but the individual rooms needed to be refloored, the bathrooms retiled, sheetrock needed to be hung and primed. To my surprise, I saw the there with a tool belt helping to install a sink. Long story short, he donates his legal services to that one shelter, helping to set up restraining orders, divorces, custody, etc., for abused women trying to get away from their abusive partners or family. At first, I wondered if this was some sort of court-ordered community service. It wouldn't surprise me if he had done something to deserve it and then pissed off a judge somewhere. But no. The coordinator for the shelter who was working with my church says that he had been doing that for the past few years. Apparently, his wife's previous husband was an abuser, and he has a real heart for people in that situation. Edit. I don't know if that's really a secret, but my wife didn't know about it and didn't believe me when I told her. He obviously doesn't brag about it, which is something I thought he would totally do. Sock TLDR. Asshole attorney actually has a heart. Story 9. I had a guy in my D&D gaming group with a smokin' redheaded girlfriend. All of us thought the redhead was gorgeous, but, guy code. Until it was revealed that the slightly annoying but tolerated power gamer of the group made it clear that he thought he was next in line to date the redhead if guy number 1 left the picture. Utterly destroyed our gaming group. Redhead thought it was hilarious in a sad cringe kind of way and hurt his feelings, and I personally, as the dungeon master, was aghast that a human being's mind could operate that way. Like, dude, she's not a friggin' carnival prize. I couldn't stand to play or even speak to him anymore, but it was pretty clear he wasn't coming back anyway. Good riddance. Story 10 had an ex. He was one of those "I'm so gentle and kind uwu, I love pastel colors and flower crowns uwu" types, who went on to date a friend of mine. This friend goes on to tell me they broke up because he admitted to getting sexual with his dog on multiple occasions and asked if my friend wanted to watch him jack off that dog on Skype call. I was like, dude, I just broke up with him because he was fucking annoying. Story 11. There was a woman whom I considered my friend for many, many years. She had cancer, survived it, but it was still there and created many problems. She even appeared on TV shows as an advocate for cancer patients, did a lot of political activism, was very much opposed to euthanasia, published some books. Then one fine day, through a series of coincidences, it turned out that her cancer had never existed. She had completely made it up. A big fat whopping lie. I would feel ashamed because I fell for it for so long, except that a lot of other people fell for it too, including professionals, doctors, nurses, priests. Needless to say, it ended that friendship. And it made me think a lot about how easily fooled we all are. Oh, by the way, she has died by now. Of cancer. I'm not kidding. Not the cancer she had made up, of course. Karma can be such a... Story 12. There was a story about a guy being a serial date rapist, as in, he often went out to clubs in bars, drugged girls, and raped them. As it turned out, one of my friends knew the rapist and also knew that he'd been doing it for at least 2 years. He also blamed a few girls for it. Made me a bit repulsed by that friend, TBH. Story 13. Found out my best friend tried to rape a girl once and bragged about it to everyone but me. Also found out he held a knife to one of his ex's throats. There are many more things, but finding this out after a 10-plus year friendship, I ended it abruptly. Story 14. Someone I knew told me that he wants the age of consent lowered, and how pedophiles are discriminated against in today's society. Complete game changer. Story 15. As a kid, I found out my friend had lied to me, and the whole school saying that he had trained real Pokemons and that he flies on the Nimbus cloud. Broke my heart as a kid, not because he lied, but because I really wanted to fly on the Nimbus cloud. Story 16. My boyfriend years ago told me he was abused as a kid by his gay uncle, his actual uncle's partner, yet saw him as usual because he didn't want it to affect the family, and I had to be nice. A few months after he told me, he got drunk and in an argument with his dad yells it so everyone could hear. We broke up not long after. Last I heard, his dad was looking for blood and the ex-uncle was in jail. Story 17. As a kid, I used to spend a lot of time playing computer games with my neighbor. One day, I caught him pressing the caps lock key each time he wanted to capitalize a letter. Told him the shift key did the same job, which led him to a 15-minute tirade about how the caps lock button was better. We've drifted apart since. Story 18. I have a guy friend who has always been quite popular with the ladies, despite being quite an average-looking guy. We lost touch for a few years, but within 24 hours of reconnecting again, he told me that he secretly meets guys on gay dating apps, hires male trans escorts, and absolutely loves cross-dressing. Now, the only time we ever really speak is when he wants my opinion on some lingerie or toys. Story 19. Had a friend who hung out with two friends who were girls, and he was male. All went well according to him. But the girls told me he said, "It's getting hot," and proceeded to take off his shirt and masturbate and finish into a cup, got all sweaty, then just left. Couldn't look this man in the eye ever again and cut off all contact. Story 20. There was this one girl I'd known for a long time but wasn't massively close to who we all thought was being terribly controlled by her boyfriend. She would tell us that he decided when you was allowed to drink, when she was allowed to go out, what she was allowed to do, etc., and that he hid things around the house, and that he had started to impose bedtimes for her and shout at her over what seemed like extremely minor things. We all thought he was awful and encouraged her to leave. Then she moved in with me and I realized she was extremely emotionally unstable and an alcoholic. Within months, I found myself wanting to do, or in some cases actually doing, all the things she said her controlling boyfriend had done. I remember one time after trying to remain patient with her for a while, she said one thing that was relatively minor, and it was the last straw. I just snapped and screamed at her. I then got phone calls from all our mutual friends to talk about my behavior and anger management, presumably as a result of the story being told back to them in a somewhat biased way. So, in a way, her secret changed my opinion of him. Edit. Didn't expect this to gain traction, and the ex-boyfriend is picking up more sympathy than he deserves below. So to make myself feel better about that, I'll add a few more details. While I did gain an understanding of much of his controlling behavior and had a much less black and white view of him and of their relationship, he was no saint. He was very far from it, in fact. For instance, he had been physically violent with her, and this was corroborated by others. There were plenty of times I got so angry I felt like raising a hand to her, and I walked away to calm down. There is never an excuse to actually hit someone. What I would say is that they were both abusive. But I had a much less black and white view of both of them after getting to know her better. Story 21. The local park homeless alcoholic was once a professor of ancient history and dead languages, and could speak and write in languages many of us would never even see. He used to teach at Trinity College until he was convicted for his wife's death. How she died or if he did it is a mystery to me, but one person I've spoken to reckons it was an accident, and another says they don't think he did it. Made me see the reality that no matter who you are, you could end up in a personal. Story 22. My best friend's brother-in-law kept getting sore throats for months. His normally soft-spoken mother, fed up by this time, screamed at him in front of a full house. "What do you expect if you keep eating that dirty pussy?" Later that day, I found out that both he and his GF were dirtballs. He showered about once a month and she would only wash her face, hands, and feet. They are both very attractive, educated, athletic, church-going people, and all I can think of is, "You're is so rotten it's contagious," and this catches it with his mouth. Story 23. There is a very shy girl at work, pretty but quiet and mousy, and I stumbled across her on R Curvy. Made me see her in a new light. Edit. The link is NSFW, in case anyone else didn't realize. Story 24. There was a guy I worked with that was kinda handsy, but generally really nice all the time. I learned he was gay, but in the closet. It was then I started noticing how he treated everyone else, kinda douchey. He isn't handsy with anyone else. So all the positive attention was him trying to flirt? I guess. He was not very good at it. I had a conversation with him when he asked me to lunch. I had to awkwardly explain that I am married, etc. I feel like I may have accidentally led him on. I feel a little bad about it, but I wore my ring every day, and I have pictures of my family on my desk. We are still on friendly terms, and I introduced him to my circle of gay bro friends to help him acclimate to the culture. We became decent enough friends, but a lot of the flirt-like behavior stopped. Story 25. It only slightly changed my perception, but I was about 9-10 when my dad told me why he and my mom split up. His exact words in a sad tone were, "She was seeing another man. He wouldn't tell me who it was." From now on, every time an affair is mentioned, I give a quick glance to my mom. She still doesn't know I know. Edit. Damn. My highest rated comment is a throwaway. Story 26. I work at a trucking company. One day, the other girl who works in the office with me and I were talking about which drivers were our favorites. I mentioned this one kind of cantankerous old veteran who was cranky to 90% of the people but always a sweetheart to me, and the other girl's face went pale. She said, "You haven't Googled his name then, have you?" I Googled it and found out he had been arrested for sodomy when he worked at a prison years ago, and that he had flown Nazi flags outside his house. I mean, I knew he was far-right-leaning politically, but wow. I'm still nice to the guy, but also low-key kind of terrified of him. Story 27. There's this really young Sikh kid who clerks an all-night gas station nearby, where I buy my coffee. The other night when I went in, nobody was at the counter and 3 people were waiting. One guy eventually started knocking random doors, and this kid came out. Looks like he's about 17 of the one-room bathroom in the place. About a minute later, as I'm being served, this really old security guy came out of the same bathroom, glanced at me looking shifty, and then scurried off into the night. This town is gross. Story 28 sibling set of cousins. My third cousins. 2 sisters and a brother. The youngest sister, she's 31 this year, this happened in about 2009-ish, was dating a mixed-race guy. One parent black, the other white. I didn't realize how racist the family was. They told her to leave him immediately, and when they found out she not only hadn't left him but was also now having with him, her siblings beat her up while their father watched, and they forced her onto a plane to the EU the next day, black eye and all. Had her personal documents seized by her sister, and was basically a prisoner to her. I found out about a year later about this when our other cousin told me. I can never look at anyone in that family again the same way, and it's so sad because as a kid I was very fond of them. The older sister had a coffee shop which my dad used to take us to a lot, and I think that's where he met my stepmom. I am not sure if this is a secret now since my mom knows, and I didn't tell her. Though at the time my cousin asked me to keep it quiet because it was top secret and very sensitive information. I don't know if any of the family know that I know about this as well. If any of them ever read this, you guys. Story 29. When my ex cheated on me after a relationship of 5 years, I was devastated. But despite everything, I was willing to give her another chance. I still loved her so much. During that time, I talked to my mom a lot. I voiced my concerns on how I thought I'd never be able to trust her again. That is when she told me my aunt had an affair, probably to console me. My aunt and uncle had always been this really nice couple to me, but it seems like I was wrong. They worked it out, but I can't see them any differently anymore. I somehow see her more evil and him a little bit of a victim. Story 30. When I found out my dad smoked weed, it didn't really change my opinion on him that much. I had thought he might have been a stoner for a few years leading up to the reveal, but finding out he still actively does LSD, shrooms, and occasionally cocaine made our relationship a little bit weirder, especially after tripping with him a few times. I still love him, and he's still a great guy usually, but I can't look at him the way that I used to anymore. Story 31. There was this guy in my high school who was the typical big meathead football player bully. Picking fights, playing mean-spirited pranks, super homophobic and misogynistic. He was something straight out of a teen movie. My senior year, he ended up in my English class. At the end of the year, we had to do senior statements, which basically are speeches where you talk about a very painful, life-changing event you've been through. He got up and began to tell a heart-wrenching story about how he and I's brother have been abused by his father since they were children. He hates football and wishes he could do drama like he wants, but his father would never allow it. He acknowledged what and he is, and was besides himself for not knowing how to treat others. He quietly went back to his seat where he proceeded to cry quietly for the remainder of the class. His story radically changed my opinion of him. He was the first person who made me realize most people do deserve compassion. He still lives in my hometown, and occasionally I find him at the bar downtown. He's a good guy, much quieter now, but hopefully pursuing something he loves because he deserves the happiness. Story 32. My old man used to hang nooses in the garage when I was very small as a way to manipulate my mother into staying with him. I'll kill myself if you leave. This as far back as 1990. She finally left him 7 years ago. When I found out how he'd been to her all this time, I could never look at him the same way. He did not kill himself. Story 33. My boyfriend's mom cheated on his dad. Then, the night I met her, she said, "You're best friends with someone, and then all of a sudden you're divorcing them, and they're your worst enemy." And I just can't trust her opinion on herself in situations after that. Story 34. My formerly favorite aunt was jealous of my relationship with her son, my younger cousin. He has always been like my little brother, and I was his go-to person for everything. While arguing with him, she accused us of having a sexual relationship in way more derogatory language, because why else would we be so close? Never mind him basically being raised in my home and me always babysitting. I hope it was just for shock value, but I was disgusted that she would stoop so low to hurt him and me in turn. I told my mother about it, and she doesn't believe her sister would say something like that. We must have misunderstood her. I don't see how it can misunderstand what that said, but whatever. Story 35. We are quite open about stuff in our family, so I've learned a lot of weird stuff about my father and my stepmother. But I think maybe the highlight was when my stepmother casually joked about my father's thing for MTV's Geordie Jersey Shore. Apparently my dad watches the show when he can't sleep, all alone in the night. Story 36. My stepbrother stole my parents' identity, opened up credit cards, and maxed them out. When my parents found out, they didn't prosecute because he would end up going to jail. They paid the credit cards off by making a settlement with the bank. If he shows up at Thanksgiving to my mom's house, Dad is deceased. It's going to be dramatic. Story 37. Not really changed my views toward one person, but made me think differently overall towards a whole part of society. I worked a construction job with a small company during college. One of the guys I worked with, let's call him Dave. Dave was very quiet and usually kept to himself, but knew how to do just about anything. Framing, tool repair, finish work. You name it. He knew how to do it. After the initial introductions and a few weeks of work, he warmed up to me and we got along well. After working for a few months, he didn't show up at work one morning. This was strange because Dave was never late. After talking to some of my other coworkers, I found out that Dave was a Tier 2 offender and that he had, as part of his sentence, to submit to random dwelling searches. I honestly was blindsided by this, as I never would have guessed that he had a criminal record. This changed my views on ex-cons almost 180s. I majored in criminal justice and was in class with future cops and corrections officers. The attitude toward convicted felons was that they are unredeemable and will offend again. I bought into that mode of thinking as many college students do with no real-world experience. After seeing Dave work and hearing him talk, it was obvious that he realized his mistakes and was making a huge effort to make things right. Being nosy, I looked up his conviction when I got off work that day. The crime was bad, but it was non-violent and had happened a decade or so before I met him. The next day, everyone went on working, but I found a deeper respect for Dave. And I learned that a person is not the sum of their past mistakes. Story 38. Not necessarily a secret, but I was 8 years old, it was Christmas, and our family was over at a friend's acreage for Christmas Eve. I was sitting on my dad's lap, and I placed my hand up against his to compare size, and to my utter shock and horror, I noticed that my dad was missing a finger, his pinky finger. My mom and dad were confused. You never noticed that? He's been missing his finger your entire life. No, I hadn't ever noticed it, and it was actually a bit too much to handle for an 8-year-old at the time. I was absolutely devastated. In actuality, he lost his thumb while working on the oil rigs, and they transplanted his pinky finger to where his thumb would be so that he still had some sort of grasping abilities. Pretty cool, but freaked me out so badly as a kid. Story 39. My friend in high school went to jail shortly after graduation for raping, beating, and nearly strangling his on-again, off-again girlfriend to death. Turns out it wasn't the first time, or the first girl he did it to. Story 40. I met a friend's new boyfriend who told me that he had spent time in jail for 2 DUIs. He got a DUI and then he got another one and the judge gave him jail time. He drank a lot, but when I met him, he was at least very careful about not driving. But to be honest, I judged him for it. Pretty shitty to drive drunk. And how do you get 1 DUI and then not learn your lesson? It was something that affected the way I saw him. Fast forward 3 years, and now he is married to my friend. One night I am out with my friend, and she makes a comment about his sister. I had heard that he had a sister who died, but I never knew the details. Turns out she was a victim of a violent murder by an ex-boyfriend, and my friend's husband is the one who found her body. Walked into the house coming home from college for summer break and found her. The DUIs were in that first 6 months after her death. Should he have been driving drunk? No, of course not. But after I learned that I had so much compassion for him, and the terrible pain he must have been going through, people deal with such terrible things, and they don't always deal with them well. Story 41. A friend I grew up started dating a guy and quickly got pregnant and married at 25 or so. One night, hanging out with her and her husband, he's like, "Did she ever tell you how we met?" Apparently she was in since right after she turned 18. He was one of her Johns, but they took a liking to one another. They've since been divorced. Story 42. Brother, best friend and best man in my wedding. All of a sudden moved to Washington about a year and a half ago. We have no ties there, and neither does he, and we just couldn't figure it out, but whatever, maybe he wants a new start. Then all of a sudden he moves back to the town my parents live in. Last Thanksgiving, the U.S. Marshals showed up to take him into custody and to send him back to Washington. He's facing trial next month on illegal touching of a minor amongst many other charges. Definitely has changed the way I look at him. Story 43. My brother-in-law's mother is very sweet, kind, and quite religious. A few months ago, my brother-in-law, while drunk, confided in me that his mother had slept with his sister's husband. This had occurred years ago. The husband and sister have long since divorced, but it completely shocked me that she would ever do that. Story 44. I know this guy who is the awkward engineering type that we all know and love. Like in meetings, he will raise his hand if he has something to say, and he'll do stuff like throw a party, then tell all the men he invited that it's been canceled, so just a bunch of chicks will come and not have any fun. Well, apparently several years before I met him, he lost his virginity to his roommate, who was a man transitioning to a woman. This made him incredibly anti-gay, and now he always tries to project himself as super masculine in social situations. Also clear, he has zero self-confidence with the whole raising your hand to speak, and stuff like that. Story 45. In high school, I learned my best friend would contact most of the female friends I had, generally after I had a falling out or just some confrontation with them, and sexually harass them with, among other things, his overpowering foot fetish. I learned this in senior year when I started reconnecting with some of these friends, and all of them had the same story. I haven't spoken to him since. Story 46. One of my family's friends is the offender. He was convicted of rape long before I was around, did jail time, is on the register, and has to check in every year or something for an updated mugshot. He has a wonderful family, a great job, and he's always been very kind to us. I never would have suspected it. I only found out when I was doing a offender search in my area and got curious about my old hometown. Changes the way I look at him for sure, but he's still a great friend of ours, and it doesn't mean I won't hang out with him anymore. Story 47. I have a very close family member who for years had an extremely estranged relationship with their family. They've behavioral issues, a drinking problem. Though this is something that no one acknowledges, we are very healthy like that. They've quit this now. This person moved between nostalgia and hatred of their family and was disowned by their family. From their behavior and Jekyll and Hyde personality, I often suspected this, but I was told by them nearly 2 years ago that they were sexually and emotionally abused by their parents. I knew it. Yet in that moment, I forgave them a lot of wrongs they've done to me, a lot of abuse done to me. Essentially, they're a wonderful person who is trying to rectify and change themselves. World is moving on, and they're getting older. Being older means vulnerability. Vulnerability reminds them of being a small, scared child with the two people in the world they care about the most and should be able to love and trust implicitly, being the two people who hurt and hate them most. My heart breaks at this fact. It made me look at them differently. Story 48. Went to a wedding of a family friend who was marrying a British guy. Met his son, and later on ended up visiting London not too long after and thought it was strange that he never wanted to talk about his father or his new stepmother. At some point, I bring up how much I like his dad and how I remember the first time I met him 5 years ago. Saw my friend's face go white and asked if he was okay. He told me his dad had actually cheated on his mom with his new stepmom, but he'd only found out about it 6 months ago. He didn't know they'd been together for 5 years. I didn't know that my family friend was the other woman. We literally sat in silence for 5 minutes to process each other's information. I see them at least once a month, and I can't help but think about it every time I do. Story 49. I don't know if it's a secret, but the gay best friend at my uni is the worst gossip. As in, he'll tell people if you had a miscarriage if you asked him for support but don't want anyone to know about it. He pretends to be everyone's best friend until they leave the room or you're alone with him. He will tear you to shreds. Like, okay, I see you, Ian. I see you. I used to think he was nice or friendly, but really, he's all 4 mean girls combined into one stupid body. I'd love to tell everyone he talks to that he's a gossip but that would put me on his level, wouldn't it? Story 50. My good friend was the result of his mother being raped. I'm one of very few people who know, and I understand why he is so close to his mother, yet is also so cynical towards society as a whole. Story 51. I always thought that my parents were very against drugs. At one point, I learned that my dad actually smoked weed. Not just a little, but he smoked almost every morning and every night. This upset me a lot, but I eventually got over it. Another night, maybe a year or so later, my sister was throwing a party and my mom and I were just going watch a movie in the other room or something. I was fairly young, maybe 13 or 14 at the time, so I wasn't into partying yet. But instead, she decided to go and party with my sister's friends whilst I stay in my room and watch the movie alone. I later come out of the room to go to the bathroom or get a drink or something. And lo and behold, my mom is in the middle of smoking a bowl. It really changed the way I think of my parents, and it makes me laugh anytime they give my older brother, who's 23, for smoking pot. Story 52. Found out my friend's boyfriend of 6 years basically started to rape her after they moved in together. She would apparently wake up to him ripping her clothes off, and he would always pressure her into. When they broke up, he started dating someone everyone in our town knows is a danger to herself and others. Lost all respect for him, and our friend group completely cut him out. To be honest, we was always a fucking idiot, but we all thought he was a good guy. Story 53. I had a friend who was always moderately teased for being easy, slutty, and I know she meant well, but she enjoyed the male gaze. Gorgeous girl too. Tall, blonde hourglass figure and striking bluish-green eyes, so that alone seemed to play into the rumors. We had a weird correlation with attractiveness, sluttiness in school, but anyways. One day she confided in me that she was molested on multiple occasions as a small child by a neighbor who routinely told her that she was only good for. So even though I'd joke about her being slutty, in a playful manner, unlike our classmates, now I really can't bring myself to see a attention-hungry girl as I naively used to sometimes. I really just see a girl whose innocence was taken far too early and was going through life understanding men the only way she knew how. Story 54. Someone I met while I was active duty. He was a wounded warrior. Eventually lost both of his legs. Everyone liked him. He got to do all sorts of cool things through the Wounded Warrior program, and everyone called him a hero. I somewhat recently learned that he was convicted of 2 counts of violent sexual assault of a child about 10 years ago. No matter what he did with his life after that, I can never see him as anything but a predator. Story 55. My ex cheated on me. Obviously, I was heartbroken. We'd been together almost 3 years. I asked him who he'd been cheating with, and he lists off this friend, that friend, girls off of POF, and his sister. His fucking sister. I was 20 at the time. He was 21. His sister was 14. Disgusted doesn't even begin to describe how I felt. You sure as bet your asses that I went to the police about that and told a few of the local gopniks.